All right, we're back. Let's try this again. A little bit of a connection issue. That's okay, it happens. All right. Let's send this to our buddy Chris, and we'll see if he joins us. Here he is. Hey.
Are we working?
Yeah. I
I hope
just
that. Go ahead.
no, I just like turned my Wi-Fi on and off again. I don't know if that will make anything better, but
Um, we'll see. I hope it's
sure.
not my side just for your sake, but
Hey man, technology. What are you gonna do?
yeah, it's been fun lately.
Yeah, I know, right? Especially like trying to get shit done over Zoom and stuff.
Oh, the worst.
I know. All right. Well, cool. So that answered my question pretty well as far as pack goes. I just have a couple of things.
Sure.
Um, okay, I thought this was interesting. Megan's mother says that Amber and Megan had similar phone records, and Amber actually turned down a date at the same hotel that Megan went missing from. I feel like that's kind of a big deal, you know? Has that been looked into to your knowledge?
Yeah, I'm sure it's been looked into by SCPD. What they've done with it, we don't know yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the story goes that 2 weeks before Megan went missing from what is it, Hop Hog Holiday Inn Express,
Yeah.
that Amber had gotten an out call to that. Someone had called her, said, "Come to this Hop Hog, Holiday Inn Express," and she turned it down. Um, so, a lot of people are like, "Well, if they just had these phone records, they'd figure it all out." But I think what we've learned and
Yeah.
what's been kind of said, even though SCP doesn't confirm anything, is that this serial killer is using burners most of the time, so you
Yeah.
can't really track that stuff down.
Right.
But according to so I guess that would come through Schaller, right? Because by the time all this blows up, of course, Amber's gone missing and then eventually found dead. But then when they start looking into numbers or they start talking to Schaller, they figure out that Amber had gotten this call to this hotel for an out call and didn't go, turned it down. So, um, yeah, I think it's probably been looked into as much as possible, but you know, I've been to that film there, and it's a pretty. It was. I don't want to. It does with Megan.
Um, yeah. Hopefully, I lost the, the last bit of that. My apologies, but I thought that was interesting. All right. I'm just gonna blow through these, and hopefully the connection works for them.
It's
Uh,
probably, you know what? It's
yeah.
probably the debate going on right now. All the internet's getting sucked up by the debate.
Yeah. I I had a moment of that just made me so sad that I realized that's going to be something that I have to see clips of later. Or I guess they're gonna like mute them when they're talking to each other, or like when the other person's answering a question. That's a good move.
Yeah, I was gonna do that to you, but we did. Yeah, they'll have 2 minutes to answer, and then they get muted or.
Hmm. Um. All right. Well, another thing I had here is, we all know about the pinging that happened with Melissa's phone, which was actually a tower in Massapequa. But we also know that Maureen's phone pinged about 2 weeks after she went missing. Do we know what town that happened in?
We do. And so this was interesting when this special episode where we finally got to talk to Maureen's sister,
Yeah.
Missy. And they didn't know this until later because the cops weren't saying much early on. But finally, later, as this all started blowing up and bodies were found, they had learned that about 2 weeks after she went missing, Maureen, which was what? That would have been
2007.
2000, 2007 was Melissa, right? No,
Maureen. Yeah.
Maureen. That's right, Maureen. Melissa was found first.
Right.
So yeah, when she went missing, 2 weeks after that, her phone turned on and then turned off, which just let it ping a tower. And it was out on Fire Island.
Really?
Yeah. Yep. Now
Wow.
that doesn't mean the phone was necessarily in Fire Island. But there's a water tower out in Fire Island, and we went out there and filmed, and that's a cool spot out there. I had never been out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it pinged off this tower. That's probably the only tower out in Fire Island.
That's so.
So
Hmm. What the
yeah,
hell? That wow. Um, and then that obviously makes you think about Fire Island, Jane Doe, right? I mean,
yeah, where the legs washed up way back.
yeah, exactly. Um, Jeez. Wow. Okay, I had never heard that before. That's so many like random, seemingly connections, but then it's like, you just can't piece it together. Um, I'm just gonna keep going through these. There's no
Do it.
real rhyme or reason. There's no real continuity. They're just all things. Like I said, I re-listened to the whole series, and I've heard these stories 1,000 times. So I was just listening for things that jumped out. Like, wait, what's that about? Um,
Sure. If I don't know it, I'll make it up. Let's do it.
how about our friend Coletti's story about Shannon running into the reeds, and how that doesn't necessarily line up with Pac's story. You would think that Pac would see her if she had gone into those reeds and then could conceivably retrieve her out of them. Um, yeah,
Yeah, that's a good question. So when Shannon takes off, she runs down, she knocks Coletti's door, then she goes hides behind his boat when Pac comes up.
right.
Now, from what I remember, and sometimes my facts get not sketchy, but you just forget what comes when. But how I remember it, and I think this is pretty close to what the story is. That doesn't mean it's the truth, but what the story
Right.
is that he pulls up, Pac does, in the car, in the Ford Explorer. He sees Shannon hanging out, hiding behind the boat. Coletti approaches him to say, what's going on? I already called the cops. And then Shannon takes off and runs across in front of the car and runs into the reeds. Now, I think the story goes, as far as Pac is concerned, is that, he thought she would just keep running down the road a little bit, because it is super dark out there. So once you get outside of the light, you don't see much.
Right.
But I think his claim is what he would say is he was distracted talking to Coletti and didn't get to see where she went.
Okay.
And when I was out there and we snuck into the neighborhood, there used to be, and you can get on Google Maps and check this out, especially if you do Google Earth and kind of do the time machine thing and go back and look at different times. Right around Coletti's, there was this kind of a path through the reeds that led towards Barbara Brennan's house. So she might have run down through that and cut her way along that. And I'm tempted to look it up right here
Right.
on the web, but I'm going to skip that. But so that's kind of the story is he was a little distracted trying to, shut Coletti down. and trying to figure out what's going on with her. And then, of course, Pac's claim is he always thought there was just the one way out. The only way she could have gone was out the gate right there, and he didn't realize that it turns and it goes down to a whole actually bigger part of the neighborhood,
Right.
which is where we do know Shannon ended up because she was knocking on Barbara Brennan's door a quarter mile away, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I know that John Ray kind of alleges that it's suspect that Coletti makes mention of, the reads where he didn't necessarily from the beginning. I mean, do you put any stock in that some man in his 80s is, gonna have any sort of nefarious doings?
With Coletti?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I don't think I
Neither
don't
do
think
I.
Coletti, I don't either. No. And it is weird, you think it's going to be kind of this open, beachy type of area, but once you get out there, like those reeds and in the marsh, it's like a wall. And there's a few spots in, but once you get into it, you can kind of maneuver, but it can overtake stuff pretty easily and you can lose stuff pretty quick.
Yeah. Um, how about well, staying with Mr. John Ray and the press conference that he had today dealing with Shannon's phone call. One of the Newsday article that he always takes to task, that I forget the detective's name who essentially wrote the article, but one of the things he says, of many that is inaccurate about it, is that the detective describes on the phone call that Shannon was not about to be murdered, and Ray says that that is inaccurate. My question is, what is on that tape that Ray is saying it's inaccurate that she's about to be murdered? Because that means she was about to be murdered. So I mean, what could he possibly be basing that on? You know?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's tough because, John Ray's got to play this game where, if you've listened to that episode where we came on after the call, so he knows what's on the calls. They've been released to him. He hasn't been able to release them to the public. That's what today's press conference was about. So he dances around that a little bit. And so I don't know if it's just the fact that she's saying, help, they're trying to kill me, which, it could be as simple as that, which is something we know from the tape that we've heard for years.
That's been documented, yeah.
Um, and if this, I don't remember the detective's name either, but who wrote that piece for Newsday, if he's saying she wasn't, I don't know what he's basing that on. If he's saying, well, she had a psychotic break, she wasn't really meaning that. And John Ray's like, well, that's what she said, so he's lying. I don't know.
Yeah.
But there might be something else on there that she says that would lead John Ray to say that.
Right.
I wish we all knew. And
I
when
know.
when we weren't recording, I hit John Ray up to tell me all he could. And he does really hold to the law of like, I can't really say much. So I was bummed.
Yeah, I mean, I respect that to a certain degree,
Sure.
Yeah. But it's interesting nonetheless. I had another thing on John Ray here that he says with basically some certainty that he knows that Bissett was a client of Shannon's and that Shannon was not unfamiliar with Long Island. He mentions her going out to a hotel in Uniondale. I know that hotel he's referencing. It's next to the Nassau Coliseum, and also Amagansett, which I guess Bissett had a home in. And then there's the connection that he brings up about Bissett doing some work in Oak Beach. Do you put any stock in any of that as far as Bissett goes? I never really, I mean, obviously the connection originally is, okay, he has access to burlap, and B, he killed himself after, I guess it was the day after or so, around there, that Shannon's body was was discovered. What do you make of the whole Bissett thing as far as him being a client and any involvement?
That's a tough one. Um, so I've never seen the hard evidence of Shannon's ties to Long Island.
Right.
And Pax says we never went out there. I think Diaz, the boyfriend's like she didn't have connections out there. But there are some people that are kind of swirl around Ray or know Ray or give Ray information that make some of these claims. And I haven't really seen it yet, but part of me want if Bissett was connected, I hope it comes out and I hope it's true, and then I hope we can tie him in with these other slime balls that he allegedly hung out with if it's all true. But I think to your question, what do I make of Bissett? It's hard to say much because he is dead and I could say what I wanted because he's not going to come back and sue me.
Right.
But I haven't really seen the ties yet. There's a lot of secondhand stories about how he liked women. He liked going to certain clubs with, escorts and that sort of thing. And what we've looked for is how do we tie Bissett into like a Burke or
Right.
into, some of the other people that are connected with this, into this cabal overall, and we haven't found the hard evidence yet of that. We've found a lot of different stories, but John Ray's really never led us astray. And there's so many facets to this case that just because I haven't seen the evidence of these clients that she's had out in Long Island doesn't mean it's not true at all. It's just I haven't seen it yet. But it's a good question because I would like to say, like, because there's a lot of those rumors that get going where you're like, well, she drowned. And then you really talk to someone who says, well, no, she wasn't even in the water, Shannon, let's say.
She was upright.
Yeah. So you're like, good to know. She
Right.
didn't drown. So there's a few questions that still linger and stay out there in the ether that I would like to clear up. And I think that's one of them of like, what were her connections beyond a friend of a guy who runs a taxi shop, who knows a guy who bought donuts from this one other guy, said he saw a girl like her out in, Nanza or whatever. You're like, I need more than that.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, John Ray, that's cool that he's never led you astray. He's also not afraid of saying like very bold things, like with his press conference with Leanne, who was just like, this is hard evidence that Brooke was doing. So it's like, whoa. So it's like, I'm wondering what he has that, if Alex Diaz doesn't know and Pac doesn't know, granted, Pac and Shannon were only together for 6 months as a team working together. So it's feasible it could have been before that, but I would like to know what evidence he has that puts Bissett and Shannon together, because that rumor's been around for 10 years at this point.
You're right. And I feel bad that I haven't really nailed that one down. And sometimes maybe, there's a few of us working on this and someone will take something and someone will take someone else. And so maybe we have,
Yeah.
but I know some of it gets based on these rumors that swirl. And it's like, you can talk about a journal that has a Long Island number in it that Shannon had, and that might be part of it. But that doesn't mean she had ties to Long Island,
Right.
And I've looked through her journals and I've seen, different things like that. But I I promise you, Mike, I will hunt that down. I'm going to figure out what John Ray has and really, yeah, and just kind of sort it out. And if it's just
Right.
like, well, we don't have hard proof, but we're pretty certain. I mean, there's something to that, but it doesn't make it full on, evidence.
Right. There's tons of things that are interesting about particular people, but there's never enough where it's like definitely Petrov, definitely Burke. Like, it's never enough. Like, there's always just enough to be like, Um,
I
anyhow,
know it's hard, isn't it? Because you're like,
yeah,
that Burke is such a slime ball, and I don't say that lightly. I think
yeah,
everyone knows, and he can try to sue me if he wants.
yeah.
That you're like, gosh, it's got to be him, or I wish it were him, because it would just, as a storyteller, you're like, there you go. As a musician, you're like, that's the rhythm I needed, the beat I needed to end on, and you're like, but there's just not, yeah, like you're saying, there's just not enough to really wrap up the story there. But there's a lot for Burke. Dear God.
Well, I won't reveal the name of this person, and I've mentioned this to you on one of our phone calls, but there is I do have on the faith of someone who is extremely reputable, who is not a conspiracy theorist, who is actually a former member of law enforcement, that Burke was not above. I don't know how to say this without just saying it, but he wasn't above having people killed. Um,
Yeah,
he actually claims that he did have a witness killed that was part of a drug gang case that was going on, and I could tell you more about that off air. Um,
I believe it. I mean,
yeah,
from what we've heard about Burke too, I don't want to say I believe it. I'm not surprised
exactly.
because yeah, there's a lot with Burke. And does that make him the Long Island serial killer?
Right.
No. It does make him a piece of shit, though,
Oh yeah, there's no
if
question.
it's true.
Yeah, I mean he framed a family member of mine. Well, he didn't frame him. He basically demoted him. He demoted him in rank as he was, like Verone tells the story about being on the force for 39 years. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, Burke comes in and he's like relieved of his duties, no exit interview, no nothing. Not like, hey, this case you've been working on, maybe you want to brief him on it.
Yeah.
Um, a family member of mine was high up in Suffolk County, and he actually was part of the internal affairs investigation against Burke when he was cohorting with Loretta Rickenbacker. Um, so he was actually, there was a real grudge that Burke held against him for years. And it played itself out when he became chief. He had him demoted in rank, which, by the way, cost him, like $500,000 in pension and all this other stuff. So he's a real vindictive piece of shit, no question. This is something that you've brought up that is, I think, a really interesting question, which is just the fact of when you look at the GB4, you're looking at 2007 to 2010, and 2008 is unaccounted for. Um, you know, do we know anything more about that other than just, hey, listen, nothing has been, no bodies have been found that can be linked to that year? Because I don't think there's any reason. There's no plausible reason that something in 2008 wouldn't have happened, because obviously we're before any of the bodies are being discovered. We're even before Melissa and Amber are taken from us, and excuse me, Megan as well. Um, Anything to that, you think?
Yeah. So we know Megan is 2007,
Maureen.
and then, sorry,
Sorry.
Maureen. 2009 is Melissa. Yes. And then 2009, 2010. There's two girls, right?
Yeah.
Months apart. So your question is, like in this theory, or not theory, but just these thoughts we've had is, you know, it looks like it's ramping up. So did this person take a year off? Did they just not do anything in 2008? And there's a lot of those myths about serial killers that they never change their MOs, or they they never stop killing. And I think those are myths that have been proven, just to be myths, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
they do age out of it or they do change their MOs. But I guess you could say maybe in 2008, this piece of shit was in jail. Maybe he got arrested,
Hmm.
or maybe things got hot, or maybe something happened in 2007 and he's like, oh gosh, that was too close. I need to take a break. Or maybe in 2008, someone went missing and he put her somewhere and she hasn't been found yet, you know? Um, so I don't want to say that's my lead theory there, but I've always been intrigued by what happened in 2008, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. And, one thing I would like to do with the series is get some cadaver dogs and still search that road more, you know?
You took the words right out of my mouth, because obviously we had Suffolk, and you point this out as well, that's Suffolk shut down the investigation after December 2010 because it was cold outside. That's what they say. um you know I you have to wonder, are there more remains out there? I mean, I wonder that. And also, maybe all of those, it also gets into the question, like, was Maureen there before the other, was Maureen placed there before the others were placed there? If something did happen in 2008, you know were all the bodies together somewhere, and then in 2010 he puts them all out there? It's just, I don't know. I know that Culker again has the theory that the GB4 were all placed there in one night. I tend to think that probably makes sense. But then that means he was hanging on to Maureen's corpse for 3 years.
Yeah,
That's
that's
dark
even
shit.
hard. That's hard to even think about. And I know Colker has that theory because they're so well placed apart. They're
Yeah,
a tenth of a mile, a tenth of a mile, and going out there and looking at where these bodies were found and the markers, they're not that totally uniformed. I mean, it's pretty uniformed. So I think, if, and I don't know if we've talked about this, but if you start at the bridge, let's say the Robert Moses Bridge, right, that goes over to the big tower thing, I think it's the Robert Moses Bridge,
yep,
and let's say you head west towards the city,
yeah,
you could set your trip and mark a mile and set a body, and the next time you come out, you mark a mile and go a little farther, and so there's ways of doing it that I think doesn't mean it had to be all at one time. Um, I think, I lean towards that because I think that, as weird as it sounds, makes sense in my head to think, I'm going to store these bodies for a while and go put them out is even more horrific and even more something I do not get. I don't get killing anyone anyway,
sure,
but I just don't know where that comes from.
right,
Um, so there's ways of thinking around that, I'm not sure, but when we talked to Rachel and Josh, I don't know if it came up on the call that we did, the special episode that we did, but the first time I talked to Josh Seaman, me and my buddy Johnny Mars, who worked on the show we're doing, we were in Long Island. We just met with Rob Trotta, and Josh Seaman calls us and he's, hey, I hear you guys are working on this, and he talked about, and you can stop me if you've heard this one, but he talked about his interview that he did with Dormer, the
yeah.
uh, the ex chief of police, right? Am I saying, I get my people confused, but the
Yeah, the
guy, yeah,
commissioner,
Dormer,
yeah, hmm,
and
the
he was
Irish guy.
talking, yeah, the Irish guy. I'm like, is that racist? I don't think so. He's got the Irish lilt, right? Um, but Zeman said when they wrapped up the interview, he was like, "What did I not ask you?" or "What should I have asked you?" And Dormer said to him, according to Josh Seaman, is, "You should have asked me about how many bodies are still out there." And that always is like, what?
Yeah.
So, you know, you can find these cadaver dogs. There's teams of them, and I one of the things that's always been on my list that I've been telling my bosses I want to do is go out there and just see. I mean, because as you know, half the girls, half the victims in these killings haven't been identified because they were so estranged from their families, and people don't know to be looking for them necessarily. So are there still people out there that their families could have answers that haven't been found yet?
Yeah.
And that all leads back to this 2008. What happened, and is there someone out there or around there that, he had to put somewhere else, but someone who went missing in 2008, because it does seem weird to go 2007, 2009, ramp it up twice in 2010.
Right.
So I don't have an answer, but I'd love to know.
And then if you think about it, you go from Megan Waterman in May, Amber in September, found in December. I mean, 2010 was crazy, and
Yeah,
like that's think about that. That's like, less time than we've been in quarantine.
yeah,
So that was fast.
yeah.
Um, which is just, I don't know what, yeah.
And
But I
it's
mean,
so weird that none of it would have happened unless
without
Shannon
Shannon,
went missing,
I
which
know.
is just so, that's what makes this story so bizarre. And I
No,
think you and I land on the same page. I don't know if Shannon's tied to them, but it is so bizarre that she's the reason they were found.
yeah,
Where do you
I was
land on that?
I was very strong, no, but I almost feel like, well, geez, it's so tough. I don't know, man. I don't know anymore. I used to think no for the longest time, but now Colker and Ray, I think there's more credence to the idea. Let's just start with foul play on Shannon's part, right? Because
Sure.
there's really two questions: is like, what, A, was there foul play, and then B, is she connected to any of the other victims? It's like, I feel kind of, I almost lean towards there was foul play. I think I slightly lean towards foul play, and I'm fairly lean away towards connection to the other bodies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense. It's such a weird case where you're like, I got to go in 60-40 foul play,
Yeah,
40-60 not related.
right.
Um, yeah, I think I land close to you. I land 50-50 foul play, I would say. And again, that goes back to all this time I've spent with Colker, who is the most grounded, non-conspiracy,
Yeah,
doesn't entertain it, doesn't care. He doesn't get wrapped up into this stuff like some people we
no,
know that live it.
yeah,
But he still is like, look, people know stuff out there. So that's where I can't let go of the idea of foul play, you
yeah,
know? Um, but it's just, and we've said this about the whole Shannon thing. Any road you go down, you just end up going like, what? That doesn't make sense. Like, well, hypothermia. And you're like, well, it was chilly, but it wasn't hypothermia weather. Because people are like, well, you shed your clothes with hypothermia, and that's why she took her call for clothes. That was at the beginning of the marsh.
yeah.
It wasn't in any sort of water. It was 100 feet from literally Hackett's back door,
I know, I know.
which is weird. So
It's
that
just,
aside, it's not where, like, if she'd gone through the marsh, gotten wet, even though I don't think drowning is an issue. I'm sorry I'm moving. I had to plug my phone in.
it's okay.
But you're not going to get hypothermia as soon as you enter this marsh. It's not like, God, I'm so chilly, I'm freaking out, I'm taking off my clothes, which is, one of the hallmarks of hypothermia where you feel like you're burning up. And then go through the marsh and then die a quarter mile away. So hypothermia is out, drowning's out. So then, like, let's say she had a psychotic break, right? So let's say it wasn't foul play, but she had a psychotic break, got into the marsh, and then died from what? Was it cocaine, like cocaine overdose?
But it wasn't, because her autopsy was clean for drugs, right?
Well, that's one thing. They only tested for certain drugs with the autopsy.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's still kind of weird. Like, how do you end up dying out there if it's not hypothermia, or if it's not drugs, or if it's not drowning?
If we had law enforcement who was doing the right thing from the beginning, someone should have investigated on if that crime scene looked staged. Like where her clothes were. There's professionals that do this. Where her clothes were, how her phone was intact. Like, after 18 months and her phone is still turning on and not destroyed. Um, why would her clothes be there? Was that a person setting her clothes there to stage that she ran this way and blah, blah, blah. And then you have Coker's idea of like, it would have been a hell of a lot easier for someone to just peel off down the highway and place her in, 30 feet in, rather than coming all the way from the other side,
Yeah,
and then the problem of like, okay, was there foul play on Shannon? Well, who's involved in that foul play? Because then you start thinking about Bissett and Burke and Hackett and crazy shit going on in Oak Beach. And then you go, well, if that was foul play with that cabal, what are they going to stop at one person? No, they're going to be behind all this other shit. You know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah.
it's so, I don't know. How are you on time? I should ask. I don't want to take up all your time. I
I've got
have
about 5 more minutes.
Cool.
And I'll say one more thing, because
Yeah,
there's the whole thing of how she died that just is confusing and adds to my issue of like foul play, you know,
right.
adds to my percentages, if you will, for lack of a better term, as we wait it out. But
Yeah,
this is something we've talked about before, especially on the podcast, is Hackett was this busybody, king of the neighborhood, wanted to be involved with everything,
yeah,
and in charge of everything, had access to the security footage, and didn't save it.
yeah,
That's one of the bigger things that leans me towards foul play, because it's one thing to say like, well, they weren't working. And that happens. You put them up for show and you don't keep up with them and they don't really work, but people are like, oh, security cameras, let's get out of here. But he turned them in, but they'd already been taped over. And it's like, are you kidding me? This guy who knows police procedure wants to be a policeman anyway, as you heard from the podcast, like he put on fake police lights on his car and would respond to calls.
yeah. He's out of his mind.
So why would he not get that footage and save it? And if he doesn't, because something weird's going on, does it show 17 cars leaving from Michael Pax or Joe Brewer's house because there was a party going on? I don't know. But that would mean something, but that tape was never found, and that's just weird to me.
Yeah. It is. I would definitely like to know who else was at that party, if anyone. There's so much we could have got to that we didn't. That's just how this case goes. I don't want to anyone who sees this either on this stream tonight or on YouTube where it'll live after this. We just want to make mention of Valerie Mack and her family, and hopefully some more of these victims get identified. I know we talked a lot about Shannon, which is, it's always, the whole thing about Shannon is whether she was related or not, but she'll always be connected because of what it led to.
Hmm.
But before we let you go, do you want to talk about anything to do with as far as season 2 goes? Or I know you're involved with some other shows. Anything you want to plug? Too early for that, maybe.
Well, no, I don't have any answers on season 2. I wish I did.
Sure.
We do have a new podcast coming out soon that is about, it's the stories of a famous defense attorney and just
Cool.
his cases, and he's had some cool ones like David Koresh in Waco,
Mm,
Robert Durst from the Jinx.
nice.
He's his attorney. Um, and it's been fascinating to get to talk to him to realize like how it all works and what goes into it. And I just want to say, Mike, if you ever get convicted or get accused of a murder, let
Mm,
me know because I've got the great attorney for you. You want a good one. But
yeah,
it's been,
appreciate
you bet. Hey, I'm here for you.
that.
But I don't have an exact date when that's coming out, but I find it fascinating sitting there talking to him and getting to hear about these cases and jury selection and how to do an opening statement and why even LISK, if he's caught, deserves a good defense attorney. And if
Sure.
he is caught, I hope he loses and we all get 5 minutes with him. But he deserves a good defense attorney. So I think it's fascinating in that sense. So I'm excited for that, and I'll
Yeah.
keep you posted on it. But that's all I got right now.
Cool. Yeah, and to your point about I hope he gets caught. I think his date. I think they're. See, I don't know if it's he or they. We don't know, but I think that the Long Island serial killer's days are numbered because of the genealogical DNA.
You think
That's my
so?
yeah. Yeah.
Well, the only
I mean,
thing
look,
go
Valerie
ahead.
Mack. I mean, these other people are going to get identified. Something's going to break. I don't know if it's in 5 years or in 10 years, but I think the Long Island serial killer's days are numbered. Yeah. And then once all the corruption is out of law enforcement, and you're already kind of seeing that now. But yeah, I don't think this secret could go on forever.
Well, I of course hope you are 100% correct. Uh, I do, and I've worked on this long enough to where I still have to remind myself sometimes, like this is real.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like
I know.
this has happened, and I just can't believe it. And I wish I effing knew the answer. But one thing, this just brings up a point I wanted to make really quick is that I think there's a bit of question I've seen out there of like, well, they'll have his DNA and they're going to hunt him down, and I don't know if they have the killer's DNA,
I
right?
don't. Yeah, no, I don't know that.
But I think it's good to kind of explain that for whoever listens to this is like even Amber, who we know it as far as we know is the last victim.
Right.
She sat exposed, as far as we know, for 3 months to the elements out there, alongside the beach.
Yeah.
And that is, I don't think if there was the killer's DNA there that it's going to be around and it's not going to be, it's going to be too deteriorated. But what you're saying, like with Valerie Mack and how they found her through familial DNA, and hopefully these others for the sake of these families, that I think will get us closer to the killer. And I think that's what
Yeah.
you're saying, and I hope that's the case. But I just wanted to point that out because a lot of people are like, they have to have his DNA on record. And I see that. I'm like, I don't think they do necessarily. Maybe back with like Jessica Taylor,
Mm.
because her body was found like 2 weeks after she had been dismembered. And I hope they have it, and I hope it pops up, and that's one of the ways they bust him or they. But I do hope, like you're saying, through this familial DNA, one, more families will get answers, and it'll lead to catching this bastard.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you. I think it's probably going to, be familial DNA from the victims, which leads to circumstantial evidence. That would be my guess. If we had the DNA, I don't know. I would think we would know by now, but maybe not because, 10 years later, they're releasing fucking belts. Like, so, I mean, I don't know what that means, but hopefully, I don't know, because like with Bitroff's victims, I don't know how soon after they were caught, but they had his DNA. That's a whole nother bag of worms we don't have time for. But
That is
hey
a whole
man,
podcast or 2 episodes of the podcast.
yeah. Um, I can't wait for season 2. Can't wait for this new show. It sounds fucking awesome. And thanks for doing this, man. And yeah, I'm excited to I'm such a fan. Like I
Thank
said,
you.
you do phenomenal work, and I'm definitely like a fan of yours. Like whether it's LISK or not, like I'm in on like what you do. So
Well,
give my regards to Shannon too.
I will.
Yeah.
I will. We got a great team, and I appreciate you being on board with us. It means a lot. It really does, because sometimes it feels like you're yelling into the wind a little bit. So thanks for listening and spreading the word. And
Yeah.
I will say this: I played your music for my family the other day. I
Oh,
cranked it up, and I have 2 teenage daughters who are really hip and really cool, and I am not. And
yeah, you are.
they're like, "This is good."
Ah, man.
That is a huge compliment because they know the best music out there. I thought it was great, but to hear that, I was like, God, he must be good. So,
Well,
congrats
that
on that.
that thank you, man. That is a huge compliment. Thank you for taking the time to play my music, and please let your daughters know that I very much appreciate that. That is super cool.
Well,
Um,
you're welcome. You are talented. Let's stay in touch, and
yeah.
we'll keep moving this thing along, and hopefully I get up. Hopefully this world unlocks someday, and we get back up there and get to meet in person.
Yeah, man, and I'm definitely down to continue to help in any way I can, especially when you come up here. We'll figure it all out, and any assistance that I can provide, I'd be more than happy to. So, thank you so much, man. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for doing
All
this.
right. Thanks for having me on. See you, Mike.
Take care, Chris.